In this last video, I want to do an example of using a class selector. Now I know I went to town with the number of videos for Lab 2, but we had a lot to cover, and it was all good stuff, right? Okay, let's go back to the class selector. There are two main differences between a class selector and an ID selector. First would be the syntax. For ID selectors, we use the hashtag, but for class selectors, we use the dot. Let's create one for making text italicized and also a different color. Let's say red. We'll call this one italic text. We'll change it up. We'll make it one word with no dashes. Here's my opening and closing curly brackets, and then we'll do something to make it have the properties for making stuff italicized. The property for that would be font dash style italic. And then for the color, we'll just say red. Just like the ID selector, this is just the first step. That would be creating this class selector. Now we need to hook that to elements in our HTML. Now I say elements because that's the other difference between ID selectors and class selectors. Class selectors can be applied to more than one element. And also, elements can have more than one ID applied to them. We won't see that in this example, but you'll see that soon enough in the coming weeks. Let's choose a couple of different elements here to make italic and red. Let's do line breaks, this H2 element. To apply that, we will use the class attribute instead of ID. Class equals, double quotes, and just the name of the class. We don't have to put in the dot because we already know it's a class because we are using the class attribute. Let me make sure I save both files. Let's apply this to two other spots. Let's make this H3. Have that. Then also, we'll add this class to an element that already has an ID applied to it. You can also do that. We'll say class equals italic text. All right, let's save that. We applied this class italic text class selector to line breaks, this one here, subheading to line breaks, and also semantics. When we refresh this, I guess we won't see that here because it's already red, but when we refresh that, it did make it italic. And this one is red and italicized now, and then this one is also red and italicized. So it worked. Let's add a note here, a comment. This is a class selector. It can be applied to more than one element per HTML page. And we'll change the comment here. We'll say the CSS properties associated with the ID and class selectors are hooked to this H1 element. So to recap, just to make sure you get this, when it comes to IDs and classes, it's up to us to come up with the name. This is not anything that's part of a list or whatever. I made this up. This is something that makes sense to me as the web designer or developer for this page. So this could have easily been main PPL or something like that. So it's up to you. Just the main thing to make sure is that whatever you have in your CSS matches what you're declaring or hooking in your HTML. All right, I was trying to think if I want to do this one last part. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let's do one more class selector. We'll call this one .lab2. And for this one, just to give you a taste of what's to come next week, when we get more into CSS, I want to talk about the concept of parent-child relationships. And before I start adding to that, let's look at our HTML here. Whenever you have elements nested inside another HTML element, you consider the one that's nesting everything to be the parent. So all of this that's nested inside the article, these are considered children of this parent article. This is the parent, and this would be the children. And you'll see many parent-children relationships. Now that's an important concept to understand, because when it comes to CSS formatting, you can save a lot of time by knowing that when it comes to parents, the children can inherit all or some of the properties associated with the parent. So what we'll do is we will make article be the parent, and we will apply or hook that class selector lab2 to this one. And now whatever properties I make on here, all or some of those properties will automatically be inherited by the children. Let's do something with font size. Let's make it a little bigger, say 24 pixels. And for the color, let's make it something different. Let's make it green. Okay, so lab2, save that and save your HTML. Lab2, this class selector was applied to an article element that spans from, let me double check, from hyperlinks all the way to that. This is a size 1 heading, which should be, this is a size 6 heading. That's that one. So that would be from here to here. Let's see if when I refresh this, if we're going to see that it's 24 pixels and green. Okay, so some of the children inherited the properties. Looks like the paragraphs are 24 pixels now, and some of the headings and paragraphs are in green, but line breaks didn't change, subheading to line breaks didn't change. This is a size 1 heading didn't change. And if you look more closely at our code, let's see, line breaks, that has a class applied to it that's telling it to make it red. There's italic text, and then you have for the H3 subheading to line breaks, that's also using italic text, so it didn't make a sub green. And then this one right here, this is a size 1 heading. Well, that's an H1, and we have an embedded style sheet that tells it to be red. And that illustrates how things can start getting a little complicated when you have more than one CSS rule telling an element how to style itself. And you as the developer or designer need to understand how all that works together. And that's where the next 4 slides come in. But we'll save that for next week. But again, just a preview. You have your cascade theory, you have your inheritance theory, descendant theory, and then specificity theory. If you think about it, this italic text class is more specific. It's telling this subheading to make itself red instead of green because it's considered more specific. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll save that for next time. The main takeaway I want you to go home with or whatever is I hope you can start appreciating how all these different selectors can start working together to make your web page look exactly like how you want it to. So start thinking about that for your website project. It is going to take a combination of putting in your content and then using different types of selectors, whether it's the element selector, an ID selector, or a class selector, and then using various declarations for that to make your web page look like a web page. So that completes Lab 2. Make sure that your web page kind of looks like this. And I gave you the option to use your own colors. So it might look a little different than mine. Next step for you would be to look at Lab 2 submission to make sure that you meet all the specs for this lab.